The man's scream tore through the Sonoran night like nothing the medics had heard before. It was onto the sharp yelp of surprise, or even the guttural cry of standard pain, was something primal. Something that made seasoned paramedics step back for just a moment before rushing in. His hand was already swelling to twice its normal size, the flesh around 2 tiny puncture wounds turning a sick purple-black that spread like spilled ink on wet paper. The venom was moving fast. Within 90 seconds of the sting, its entire arm felt like it was being crushed in a vice while simultaneously set on fire from the inside. His nervous system was short-circuiting, muscles contracting violently, heart rate spiking to dangerous levels. The creature responsible was no larger than a human palm, its pale exoskeleton almost glowing in the flashlight beam as it skittered back under a rock's centroid sculpturatus. The Arizona bark scorpion. And this was far from the worst scorpion sting ever recorded. What happened to this man was just the beginning of a journey into the most excruciating, medically horrifying, and sometimes fatal scorpion envenomations ever documented. Some of these stings cause pain so severe that victims have broken their own teeth from clenching their jaws. Others trigger waves of venom that make every nerve ending in your body fire at once, creating a sensation that survivors can only describe as being electrocuted and burned alive simultaneously. The scorpions responsible lurk in deserts, jungles, and even suburban homes across every continent except Antarctica. Armed with neurotoxic cocktails refined over 400 million years of evolution. If you're ready to feel the venom yourself, smash the like button and subscribe so you never miss what attacks next. The science of scorpion venom is a masterclass in evolutionary warfare. Unlike snake venom, which often needs to be injected in substantial quantities to be lethal, scorpion venom is concentrated neurotoxic artillery delivered in microdoses through a barbed, telsome the stinger at the end of that infamous curved tail. These venoms contain complex cocktails of proteins, peptides, and enzymes specifically designed to attack the nervous system of prey, and in the worst cases, humans. The peptides bind to sodium and potassium channels in nerve cells, forcing them to fire repeatedly without control, creating waves of unbearable pain that can last for days. The evolutionary purpose is simple: immobilize prey quickly and defend against predators with maximum deterrent effect. For humans unlucky enough to be stung by the wrong species, this means experiencing pain on a scale that the Schmidt-Sting Pain Index barely captures. While bees might rank as a 2 and bullet ants as a 4. The worst scorpion stings exist in a category some researchers believe deserves its own scale entirely. There are over 2,500 species of scorpions worldwide, but only about 25 possess venom dangerous enough to kill a human adult. That number is misleadingly small because the species that can kill don't always kill. They simply make you wish you were dead. At number 10 on our ranking sits a creature that most people will never encounter unless they re-explore in the arid regions of southern Africa. Parabuthus transvolicus, the South African Fattail scorpion. The name Fattail comes from the notably thick telson that houses unusually large venom glands, and victims of its sting report something that sets it apart from most scorpions. It doesn't just inject venom, it can spray it. When threatened, this species can squirt venom up to 3 feet, aiming for the eyes and mucous membranes of attackers. But when it does sting, the experience is immediate and brutal. The venom contains powerful neurotoxins that cause intense local pain, described as a white-hot poker being driven into the flesh. Within minutes, victims experience sweating, drooling, and elevated heart rate. One documented case involved a wildlife researcher who was stung on the thumb while collecting specimens. He described the first hour as like having my hand crushed in a car door that never opens. But what made it rank at number 10 wasn't just the pain, it was what came after. The venom caused temporary paralysis in his arm, and for 6 hours he couldn't move his fingers, couldn't grip anything, while the pain continued to pulse in waves. medical intervention involved massive doses of painkillers that barely touched the agony. Number 9 brings us to the Middle East and North Africa, home to Androctonus australis, whose Latin name translates grimly to Southern Man-Killer. This scorpion's venom is cardiotoxic and neurotoxic, a dual threat that attacks both the heart and the nervous system simultaneously. The sting itself feels like a red-hot nail being hammered into flesh, but within 15 minutes, victims report chest tightness and difficulty breathing. In a documented incident from Tunisia, a young boy was stung on the ankle while playing near a stone wall at dusk. The pain radiated up his entire leg within 3 minutes, and by the time his parents rushed him to a clinic, his blood pressure had spiked dangerously high while his heart rate became erratic. What makes this scorpion rank at number 9 is the systemic chaos it creates. Victims experience uncontrollable muscle twitching, waves of nausea, and a sensation that the venom is crawling through their veins like living fire. The boy survived after anti-venom administration, but he later told doctors that the pain in his leg felt like angry bees living inside the bone, stinging from the inside out, over and over. At number 8, we find Tityus cerulatus, the Brazilian yellow scorpion, a creature so medically significant that it causes more scorpion-related deaths in South America than any other species. The venom is a neurotoxic nightmare specifically refined to cause maximum pain while disrupting the autonomic nervous system. A sting from this species creates immediate searing pain at the site, but what elevates it to number 8 is the cascade of systemic symptoms that follow. Victims experience excessive salivation, uncontrollable sweating, priapism in males, and violent muscle spasms. One recorded case involved a construction worker in São Paulo who was stung on the wrist while moving debris. Within 10 minutes, his entire arm was rigid with muscle contractions. His jaw clenched so tightly that he cracked a molar, and he was producing so much saliva that he was choking on it. The pain itself he described as electricity running from my fingertips to my chest, never stopping, just pulsing and burning. The medical team noted that even with anti-venom and muscle relaxants, he continued to experience painful spasms for over 8 hours. Number 7 takes us to the deserts of North America, where Centruroides sculpturatus, the Arizona bark scorpion mentioned in our opening, has earned its reputation as the most venomous scorpion in the United States. What makes this scorpion particularly insidious is its behavior. It's nocturnal, loves to climb, and frequently enters homes, where it hides in shoes, bedding, and towels. Its venom contains neurotoxins that cause intense pain radiating from the sting site throughout entire limbs, accompanied by numbness, tingling, and the sensation that affected body parts are swollen, even when they're not. In severe envenomations, victims experience what's called roving eye movements, where the eyes move involuntarily in all directions, along with difficulty swallowing and respiratory distress. A documented case from Arizona involved a woman who was stung on her lower back while sleeping. She woke to what felt like a knife being twisted into her spine, and within minutes, she couldn't control her eye movements and was struggling to breathe. The venom had attacked her nervous system so effectively that she lost feeling in her legs while simultaneously experiencing waves of pain that made her vomit repeatedly. She survived with anti-venom, but told reporters the pain was like nothing I've ever experienced. Childbirth. Broken bones, nothing compared to feeling like my entire body was rejecting itself from the inside. The pain is only beginning to intensify. And what waits at number 6 will make these stings seem almost merciful. The transition from number 7 to number 6 marks a crucial threshold in Scorpion. Envenomations severity, where local pain and manageable systemic symptoms give way to truly life-threatening medical emergencies. At number 6, we encounter Leiurus quinquestriatus, the Deathstalker Scorpion, a name that requires no embellishment. This pale yellow arachnid, rarely exceeding 3 inches in length, inhabits the deserts and scrublands stretching from North Africa through the Middle East. And its venom is a neurotoxic cocktail so potent that a single sting can kill a child or immunocompromised adult within hours. The venom contains a powerful mixture of toxins, including chlorotoxin and cherrybutoxin, which attack sodium and potassium ion channels with devastating precision. When the stinger penetrates human flesh, victims report an initial sensation like a cigarette being extinguished on their skin, but this is merely the warning shot. Within 60 seconds, the pain transforms into something survivors struggle to articulate: a burning, electric agony that radiates outward in pulsing waves while simultaneously feeling like the affected limb is being crushed in a hydraulic press. A documented case from Israel involved a soldier on night patrol who was stung on the hand while setting up equipment. His scream alerted his entire unit, and within 3 minutes, he was on the ground, his body convulsing as the venom attacked his nervous system. He described the sensation as every muscle in my body contracting at once, while my hand felt like it was dissolving in acid. Medical teams administered antivenom within 20 minutes, but the soldier experienced elevated blood pressure, severe chest pain, and uncontrollable muscle spasms for over 12 hours. What makes the Deathstalker rank at number 6 is on just the immediate agony S. The sustained neurological assault that can cause respiratory failure, cardiac arrhythmias, and pulmonary edema. Children stung by this species face mortality rates as high as 40% without immediate medical intervention. Moving to number 5, we find ourselves in the caves and rocky crevices of North Africa and the Middle East. Home to Androctonus crassicata, the Arabian Fattail scorpion. If its cousin, Androctonus Australis, was a nightmare at number 9, this species represents an evolutionary refinement of that horror. The venom contains some of the most potent cardiotoxins and neurotoxins found in any scorpion species, and the quantity delivered in a single sting is substantially higher than most other scorpions. The telson of this species is noticeably swollen, packed with venom glands that can inject up to 2 milligrams of pure toxin, enough to kill several adult humans if delivered efficiently. The sting itself creates instantaneous, blinding pain that victims compare to having a red-hot railroad spike driven through the affected area. But what elevates this scorpion to number 5 is what happens in the hours that follow. A case study from Saudi Arabia documented a farmer who was stung on the calf while working at dawn. The initial pain made him collapse immediately, but within 15 minutes, he began experiencing symptoms that terrified the medical team. His blood pressure spiked to stroke levels, while his heart rate became dangerously irregular. He was sweating profusely, vomiting uncontrollably, and experiencing muscle spasms so violent that he dislocated his own shoulder. The venom was causing his nervous system to fire signals randomly and constantly, creating a state of physiological chaos. His lungs began filling with fluid pulmonary edema triggered by the cardiotoxic components of the venom. Even with aggressive medical intervention, including antivenom, mechanical ventilation, and cardiac stabilization, he remained in critical condition for 3 days. Survivors of Arabian Fattail stings report that the pain doesn't simply fade, transforms. The initial burning gives way to deep, throbbing agony that feels like the affected limb is rotting from the inside out, accompanied by waves of electric shocks that can persist for weeks. Number 4 introduces us to a creature so medically significant that it has its own dedicated research programs. Hottentota tamulus, the Indian red scorpion. This species, found throughout the Indian subcontinent, is responsible for more deaths than any other scorpion in India, with mortality rates in children reaching as high as 30% even with medical treatment. The venom is a particularly nasty cocktail that attacks the cardiovascular system and the autonomic nervous system simultaneously, creating what medical professionals call a scorpion venom syndrome that can kill through multiple pathways. The sting produces immediate, excruciating pain that victims describe as molten metal being injected under the skin. But what makes this scorpion rank at number 4 is the systemic devastation that unfolds. Within 30 minutes of envenomation, victims experience profuse sweating, vomiting, priapism, and a dangerous rise in blood pressure, followed by a sudden, life-threatening drop. The venom triggers the release of massive amounts of stress hormones and neurotransmitters, essentially causing the body to attack itself. A documented case from rural Maharashtra involved a 10-year-old girl stung while sleeping. She woke screaming, and her family rushed her to a medical facility over an hour away. By the time she arrived, she was in respiratory distress, her heart rate was erratic, and pink, frothy fluid was coming from her mouth, signs that her lungs were flooding with fluid. The medical team fought for 6 hours to stabilize her, administering anti-venom, vasopressors, and mechanical ventilation. She survived, but the neurological damage was significant. 3 months after the sting, she still experienced numbness in her extremities and reported nightmares about the fire that never went out. Her mother told researchers that during the worst of it, her daughter's screams were so continuous and desperate that nurses had to sedate her just to prevent her from injuring herself further through thrashing and convulsing. The gap between number 4 and number 3 represents the difference between might kill you and probably will kill you without perfect medical intervention. And what weights in the top 3 are on just scorpions, they re-evolutionary weapons refined over millions of years to deliver the most efficient, agonizing death possible. The survivors of these stings don't speak of pain, they speak of experiencing hell itself, of moments where death seemed preferable to another second of consciousness. The venom of these creatures doesn't just attack the body, it assaults the mind. It's creating pain so overwhelming that it breaks through every psychological defense mechanism humans possess. Medical professionals who have treated victims of top 3 scorpion stings report that patients become almost catatonic, retreating into themselves because the nervous system simply cannot process the magnitude of signals it's receiving. And sitting at number 3 is a creature whose very name has become synonymous with agonizing death across an entire continent. But before we reveal the top 3, you need to understand that what comes next is unjust about about the complete dismantling of human physiology. At number 3, we descend into the realm where scorpion stings transcend mere medical emergencies and become battles against cascading organ failure. Hemiscorpius lepturus, the Gadim scorpion of Iran and Iraq, represents something fundamentally different from every other scorpion we've discussed. While most scorpion venoms are neurotoxic, attacking the nervous system with waves of unbearable pain, the Gadim scorpion's venom is primarily cytotoxic. It destroys tissue at the cellular level, causing flesh to necrotize and die. The initial sting is deceptively mild, often described as a sharp pinch or bee sting, which makes this creature even more insidious because victims don't immediately seek medical attention. They have no idea that the venom is already beginning its work, breaking down cell membranes and triggering a cascade of tissue destruction that won't become apparent for hours. A case documented in Khuzestan province, Iran, involved a farmer stung on the ankle while working in his fields at dusk. He felt the sting, saw the scorpion, but thought little of it beyond applying a cold compress. 6 hours later, he woke in agony. The area around the sting had turned purple-black, swollen to nearly twice its normal size, and was radiating heat like an infection, but spreading far faster than any bacterial contamination could. By the time he reached a hospital 12 hours post-sting, the necrosis had spread up his calf, the flesh literally rotting away while he was still alive. But the cytotoxic venom was uncontent to stay localit, had entered his bloodstream and was now attacking his kidneys. He began urinating blood as his renal system started to fail. His hemoglobin levels plummeted as the venom destroyed red blood cells, and he developed acute renal failure that required immediate dialysis. The medical team performed emergency surgical debridement, cutting away dead tissue that had turned into a black, putrid mass. The farmer survived but lost significant muscle tissue from his lower leg, and his kidney function never fully recovered. What makes Hemiscorpius lepturus rank at number 3 is this unique horror. It doesn't just hurt you. It rots you from the inside out while simultaneously destroying your internal organs. Survivors report that watching their own flesh turn black and die while experiencing deep throbbing pain that feels like the affected limb is being consumed by invisible fire is psychologically devastating in ways that even more acutely painful stings are. Number 2 brings us back to pure neurotoxic agony, but amplified to nearly incomprehensible levels. Parabuthus granulatus, the South African thick-tailed scorpion, is larger and more aggressive than its cousin at number 10, and its venom is substantially more potent. This species can grow up to 6 inches in length and possesses a telson so engorged with venom glands that it appears almost grotesquely oversized. The venom contains a complex mixture of neurotoxins that cause immediate, overwhelming pain combined with severe systemic effects that can include respiratory paralysis, cardiac arrest, and neurological damage. A sting from this creature is often described by survivors as the worst pain biologically possible, a sensation that makes every nerve ending in the body feel like it's being jabbed with electrified needles simultaneously. A documented case from the Northern Cape, province of South Africa, involved a wildlife photographer who was stung on the forearm while reaching into a crevice to retrieve equipment. His scream echoed across the desert landscape, and his assistant later reported that the photographer immediately fell to his knees, cradling his arm and making sounds like an animal being tortured. Within 90 seconds, he was vomiting, his entire body convulsing, and he had lost control of his bladder and bowels as the venom attacked his autonomic nervous system. The pain wasn't localized to his arm, had spread throughout his entire body, creating the sensation that his muscles were being ripped from his bones while his blood was replaced with battery acid. His assistant administered the emergency epinephrine they carried, but it did virtually nothing to combat the venom's effects. By the time the medical evacuation helicopter arrived 30 minutes later, the photographer was in shock, his blood pressure dangerously low, and he was experiencing difficulty breathing as the venom began paralyzing his respiratory muscles. In the helicopter, medical personnel had to intubate him to maintain his airway. He remained in intensive care for 5 days, during which time he experienced continued muscle spasms, severe pain that required continuous morphine infusion, and periods of respiratory distress. 3 months after the sting, he still experienced neurological symptoms, including tremors, numbness in his extremities, and chronic pain in the affected arm. In interviews, he stated that the initial 30 minutes after the sting were beyond anything I thought pain could be. I genuinely believed I was dying, and part of me wanted to die just to make it stop. And now we arrive at number 1. The absolute worst scorpion sting ever recorded. The creature responsible holds this position not just because of the intensity of pain it causes, not just because of its lethality, but because it combines every nightmare element we've discussed into a single perfect weapon of biological warfare. Tityus trivittatus, the South American scorpion, might not have the most fearsome name or the largest size. Adults rarely exceed 2 inches, but gram for gram, drop for drop, its venom is catastrophically potent, especially to children. This scorpion inhabits urban and suburban areas throughout Argentina, Uruguay, and southern Brazil, meaning encounters with humans are frequent and often happen in homes where victims are barefoot and vulnerable. The venom contains a particularly nasty cocktail of neurotoxins that specifically target mammalian nervous systems with devastating efficiency. When this scorpion stings, it delivers pain that victims can only describe as being burned alive from the inside while every muscle tears itself apart. But what truly makes this the worst scorpion sting in the world is what happens next, a phenomenon called scorpion sting syndrome in its most extreme form, where the venom triggers a massive release of catecholamines and other stress hormones, creating a cascade of life-threatening complications that can kill within hours, even with aggressive medical intervention. A case from Buenos Aires in 2019 represents the most thoroughly documented Tityus trivittatus envenomation on record and illustrates exactly why this scorpion claims the number 1 position. A 7-year-old boy was stung on the hand while playing in his backyard at sunset. His mother heard him scream and found him on the ground, already convulsing. She could see the tiny scorpion still near him, and she immediately called emergency services. But by the time the ambulance arrived 8 minutes later, the boy was in full medical crisis. His blood pressure had spiked to levels that should have caused a stroke. His heart was racing at over 200 beats per minute. He was producing excessive saliva and tears, sweating profusely, and his muscles were contracting so violently that he was at risk of fracturing his own bones. The pain was so overwhelming that he had essentially become non-responsive, his consciousness retreating from the assault of signals his nervous system was receiving. In the ambulance, he went into respiratory arrest as the venom paralyzed the muscles controlling his breathing. Paramedics had to manually ventilate him while racing to the hospital. Upon arrival, the medical team immediately administered antivenom. But the venom had already triggered cascading organ dysfunction. The boy's lungs were filling with fluid, his heart was showing signs of damage, and his kidneys were beginning to fail. For the next 72 hours, he remained in a pediatric intensive care unit, requiring mechanical ventilation, multiple antivenom doses, vasopressors to stabilize his blood pressure, and continuous cardiac monitoring. The medical team later reported that they had never seen such a severe scorpion envenomation, and that without the antivenom, which had only recently become available in that region, the boy would certainly have died. He survived, but the neurological effects persisted for months. He experienced nightmares, panic attacks when going outside, and continued pain and weakness in the affected hand. What makes Tityus trivittatus the undisputed worst is not just one case, it's the pattern. This scorpion causes more severe envenomations and more deaths than any other scorpion species in South America, with pediatric mortality rates in untreated cases exceeding 50%. The pain it causes is consistently described by medical professionals as the most intense they've witnessed in any envenomation. And the systemic effects can cause permanent damage to the heart, lungs, and nervous system, even in survivors who receive optimal care. The venom essentially hijacks the body's own systems and turns them into weapons against vital organs, all while creating pain so overwhelming that victims frequently lose consciousness simply because the brain cannot process the magnitude of the assault. One pediatric intensivist in Montevideo, who has treated dozens of severe Tityus trivittatus stings, stated in a medical journal that, "Watching a child go through this envenomation is one of the most horrifying experiences in medicine. You rewatching a toxin systematically attack every vulnerable system simultaneously while causing pain so severe that sedation barely touches it. The venom is still flowing through our rankings. But now we need to understand why these creatures exist at all, and what they mean for the future." The supremacy of Tityus trivittatus at number 1 demands deeper investigation, not just into what the venom does, but into the evolutionary and medical reality of why this creature remains such a devastating threat to human life. Understanding the true horror of this scorpion requires examining the cases that never make it to medical journals, the children in rural areas who die before ever reaching a hospital, and the long-term survivors, who carry the physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. In northern Argentina, where this scorpion is endemic, rural health clinics keep detailed records of envenomations, and the patterns that emerge are chilling. Between 2015 and 2020, one regional hospital documented over 300 Tityus trivittatus stings, of which 42 resulted in severe systemic envenomation requiring intensive care, and 7 resulted in death despite medical intervention. The deaths followed a consistent pattern: rapid onset of symptoms, cascading organ failure, and ultimately cardiac arrest or respiratory failure that even antivenom couldn't reverse. What makes these cases particularly haunting is the time for most deaths occurred within 4 to 6 hours of the sting, meaning families had almost no time to process what was happening before their loved ones were gone. One case stands out as perhaps the most medically significant Tityus Trivittatus envenomation ever recorded. In 2021, 4-year-old girl in Tucumán province was stung on the neck, exceptionally dangerous location because the venom enters the bloodstream almost immediately without having to travel through extremity tissue first. Her parents were both healthcare workers and recognized the species immediately. They began first aid and were in their car racing to the hospital within 2 minutes of the sting. But 2 minutes was already too long. By the time they were halfway to the hospital, their daughter had stopped breathing. Her father, a nurse, performed rescue breathing while her mother drove, running red lights and exceeding every speed limit. They reached the emergency department in 11 minutes total. From the time of the sting, an extraordinarily rapid response. Medical teams were waiting and immediately began aggressive intervention: intubation, antivenom, cardiac medications, mechanical ventilation. But the venom had already caused catastrophic damage. The girl's heart stopped twice in the first hour. Each time, the medical team brought her back. But with each resuscitation, the prognosis grew darker. Her brain had been deprived of adequate oxygen during the periods when her heart wasn't functioning properly. And the venom was continuing to attack her cardiovascular system despite multiple doses of antivenom. For 5 days, she remained in a coma. Her small body kept alive by machines while doctors watched and waited to see if her organs would recover. On day 6, she opened her eyes. The medical team called it miraculous, but the girl's parents knew the truth. She wasn't the same child. The hypoxic brain injury had caused cognitive deficits, and the venom had permanently damaged her heart muscle. At 9 years old now, she still requires cardiac medications. Struggles in school due to learning disabilities caused by the oxygen deprivation, and has severe anxiety about insects of any kind. Her mother told researchers conducting a follow-up study that the scorpion did in just sting our daughter, it stole who she was supposed to become. The medical literature on Tityus Trivittatus reveals something that elevates it beyond all other scorpions. The venom's specific biochemical targets make it disproportionately dangerous to children. The neurotoxins in the venom, particularly peptides designated as TT1 and TT2, have been studied extensively, and researchers have found that they bind more efficiently to the developing nervous systems of children than to adult nervous systems. This means that a sting delivering the exact same quantity of venom will cause exponentially worse effects in a child than in an adult. When the venom triggers the massive catecholamine release that characterizes severe envenomation, a child's heart simply cannot handle the stress. Parents report that their children wake screaming from nightmares about the pain. that they refuse to play in yards or parks, that the trauma fundamentally alters their childhood. Adults who survive severe stings describe a similar psychological aftermath: constant hypervigilance, an inability to fully relax in their own homes, and intrusive memories of the pain that can be triggered by seemingly unrelated stimuli. The evolutionary perspective adds another layer to understanding why Tityus Trivittatus sits at number 1. This scorpion has evolved in urban and suburban environments, adapting to live in close proximity to humans. Unlike desert scorpions that rarely encounter people, Tityus Trivittatus has been selected over generations for traits that help it survive in human-modified landscapes, hides in construction materials, thrives in gardens and homes, and has become resistant to many common pesticides. Its venom didn't evolve to kill humans. Of course, it evolved to quickly immobilize the small arthropods and insects it preys upon. But the same neurotoxins that can drop a cricket in seconds have the unfortunate ability to trigger cascading physiological crises in mammals, especially small mammals like the rodents that also share its habitat. Humans, particularly human children, fall into a size range where the venom is delivered in quantities that are catastrophically dangerous but not immediately overwhelming enough to simply stop the heart instead. It triggers the prolonged multi-system deterioration that makes these envenomations so medically challenging and so agonizing for victims. Public health officials in regions where Tityus Trivittatus is endemic have struggled to reduce envenomation rates despite education campaigns and control efforts. The scorpion is simply too well adapted, too cryptic, and too resilient. It can survive for months without food, can fit through cracks barely wider than a coin, and is most active during the warm evening hours when families are likely to be barefoot and less vigilant. Hospitals in endemic regions now stock antivenom as standard emergency equipment. But the effectiveness of the antivenom is limited by how quickly it can be administered. Every minute that passes between sting and antivenom delivery increases the risk of severe complications. In rural areas, where hospitals might be an hour or more away by car, that delay can mean the difference between full recovery and permanent disability or death. The number 1 position held by Tityus Trivittatus is on just about the pain it causes or even the deaths it causes. About the perfect storm of factors that make it the most dangerous scorpion to humans. Its venom potency, its preference for human habitats, its cryptic behavior, the vulnerability of its most common victims, and the rapid progression from sting to life-threatening crisis that leaves little margin for error in medical response. The sting has been delivered, the venom has done its work. But the story of these creatures and what they mean for humanity's future is far from over. The aftermath of the worst scorpion stings extends far beyond the individual victims writhing in hospital beds or learning to live with permanent injuries. These envenomations represent a growing global health crisis that intersects with climate change, urbanization, and the expanding overlap between human civilization and scorpion habitats. As global temperatures rise, scorpion ranges are shifting and expanding into areas where they've never been documented before. Tityus Trivittatus, already responsible for the worst stings on record, is now being found in regions of Argentina and Brazil, where it wasn't present 20 years ago. The scorpion thrives in warmer conditions, and as average temperatures increase, previously inhospitable areas become viable habitat. Public health researchers modeling future scorpion distribution patterns predict that by 2050, the range of medically significant scorpion species could expand by as much as 30%. Bringing these creatures into contact with human populations that have no historical experience with them, no cultural knowledge of avoidance strategies, and no medical infrastructure prepared to handle mass envenomations. In regions of the southwestern United States, bark scorpion populations are expanding northward, and hospitals in areas that rarely saw scorpion stings a generation ago are now stocking antivenom as standard protocol. The long-term medical implications for survivors paint an equally troubling picture. Recent research into the persistent effects of severe scorpion envenomation has revealed that the venom can cause lasting changes to neurological function that manifest years after the initial sting. A groundbreaking study published in a toxicology journal followed 47 survivors of severe Trivittatus envenomations for 5 years post-sting, using advanced neuroimaging and neurological testing. The results were disturbing. Nearly 40% showed measurable changes in nerve conduction velocity, indicating that the venom had caused permanent damage to peripheral nerves. A psychiatric study of pediatric scorpion sting survivors found that 38% met criteria for specific phobia. But they cannot save them from the memory of that pain, from the terror that has taken root in their psyche. Adults who survive severe stings describe similar patterns: hypervigilance bordering on paranoia, compulsive checking of shoes and bedding, and in some cases, the decision to relocate entirely from regions where scorpions are common. The economic impact of these behavioral changes is difficult to quantify, but it represents a real cost. Lost productivity, medical expenses for psychiatric care, and the burden of families restructuring their entire lives around avoiding a creature that measures just a few inches long. The evolutionary arms race between scorpions and their prey continues to refine these venoms into ever more efficient weapons. Scorpions have existed for over 400 million years, predating dinosaurs, surviving multiple mass extinction events and adapting to virtually every terrestrial environment except the polar regions. Their venom has been under continuous selective pressure for all of that time, being refined and optimized through countless generations. Recent genetic studies of scorpion venom genes reveal that these toxins are evolving rapidly, with new peptide variants emerging that show increased potency against mammalian nervous systems. And the creatures at the top of our ranking today could potentially be surpassed by even more dangerous species or variants in the future. The result is a global shortage of scorpion antivenom relative to need, particularly for species like Tityus, Trivittatus. These behaviors become so automatic that people who move away from scorpion endemic regions often continue them for years, unable to shake the deeply ingrained vigilance. Public health education campaigns struggle against generations of cultural practice and the very real observation that most people stung by scorpions do survive. Even without medical intervention, which can create a dangerous complacency about seeking immediate care for severe envenomations, the future of human-scorpion interaction appears to trend toward increased frequency of encounters rather than decreased risk. Urban sprawl pushes housing developments into previously undeveloped land where scorpions have thrived for millennia. These arachnids don't retreat from human development, they adapt to it, finding new shelter in construction rubble, landscaping materials, and the structures humans build. Climate change accelerates their reproduction rates and extends their active seasons. Meanwhile, medical infrastructure in many at-risk regions struggles to keep pace with population growth and economic challenges, meaning the ratio of available medical resources to potential envenomation victims may actually be worsening in some areas despite advances in treatment protocols. The scorpions themselves remain what they have always been: ambush predators armed with venom refined over hundreds of millions of years, carrying out their ecological role with no malice but also no mercy. They don't hunt humans, but they will defend themselves with devastating efficiency when threatened. And increasingly, humans and scorpions find themselves in the same spaces at the same times. For the victims at the top of our ranking, for the children who survived Tityus, Trivittatus, envenomations, and the families forever changed by watching their loved ones fight for life against an opponent that weighs less than a penny, the statistics and projections mean little. Their reality is personal and permanent: the scars, the chronic pain, the nightmares. The moment of terror that divided their lives into before and after. These stings represent the intersection of human vulnerability and evolutionary optimization. A reminder that for all our technology and medicine, we remain susceptible to creatures that existed long before we did and will likely exist long after we're gone. But powerful enough to bring a human being to the edge of death or beyond. And as our planet continues to change, as scorpions expand their ranges and adapt to new environments, these encounters will only become more common, ensuring that the rankings we've explored today may someday need to be revised as new worst cases emerge from the expanding frontier where human civilization meets the ancient, venomous world of scorpions. But what if I told you there's something even worse waiting in the shadows? Something that makes these stings feel like a paper cut. Click the video on screen right now. The most painful bites in the animal kingdom ranked.